I hope everyone's doing well. So I want to go through this. I ordered a book called The Curse of Ham because I knew that based on studying the Bible, guys, and spiritually discerning it, I know that this stuff is bogus with regards to claiming that anybody is of some so-called chosen race. It's just so ridiculous on the face of it. And actually, it kind of makes sense that something like this would be invented, right? Because think about the colonization in the past, guys. They always did it in the name of religion. And so at some point they were going to have to flip the script because in the under the old paradigm, they did it under the name of what? White supremacy. That's what they did. They did it under the name of white supremacy. So you had, again, all the colonization that was going on, manifest destiny, was done under the guise of, religion. And so now you can't keep doing it under that guise because at some point you're going to have to change it and make it seem like, well, it's not about race anymore. Because if you're going to fake the prophecy, you're going to have to bring about so-called world peace when the Messiah comes, right? And this is why the people who claim they're of the chosen race say, well, we reject Jesus because he didn't bring world peace. But if you look and read the scriptures, he says, I did not come to bring peace, but but a sword. He said I didn't come to bring peace. And they said, well, he didn't bring world peace. But then he said, well, my kingdom's not of this world. You're not going to have peace in this world. This world's going to bring forth death, and you got to conquer death. And the only way to conquer death is by grace through faith, being converted and becoming a new creature, born again of the incorruptible seed that liveth and abideth forever and never perishes. And that's a birth that's from Jerusalem above, which is free as mother of us all. So God is explaining that the way you conquer death is by grace through faith. And your flesh is never going to conquer death. Your flesh is going to perish and it's going to go back to the dust. But when you're trying to pervert the word of God and your treasure is in this world, you want a fake Bible prophecy. So what you have to do is you have to say, that thing about there being a chosen people above all people that dwell upon the face of the earth, we're not going to interpret that like the chosen people are all those who are born again, being found in him, having not mine own righteousness, those who are born from Jerusalem above, and that dwell above the face of the earth. We're going to just change it and say, well, okay, let's just say that the kingdom is down here, but not as people who were born from Jerusalem above, who are here now as strangers and pilgrims who are telling other people that they need to be converted so that they can be born into the kingdom of light. No, forget all that heavenly stuff. That's all crazy talk. No, God has a chosen people of the flesh and then subdivided of a race. But then you don't want to say white supremacy at this point. So what do? You say we need to carve out a subset and just say these people are not really white. We're just going to say they're Jews. And we're not going to say, you can't say don't be against God's white Jews because that gives it away too. So you just say, you come up with the word Semitic and you say, well, don't be anti-Semitic, right? Which is a way of saying don't be against God's chosen race. And you don't care that it's confusing. You don't care if there's information to prove that you're fake. You don't really care that there's stuff that is obviously what you're saying is a fraud. As long as you can control the media, as long as you can control the pseudo churches, you can get people to believe it. As long as you can control the academia and the history books, as long as you can control science, you can pretend that, oh yeah, there's a chosen race and now we can trace the people back from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then you come up with this thing talking about we got so-called Jewish blood. And that's what you do. But your whole root, you're going to have to do this. To implement this system, you're going to have to do what? You're going to have to make the Bible carnal. You're going to have to take something that's spiritual and you're going to have to make it carnal. Right? Even the Bible says the natural man receiveth not the things of God, right? Because they're spiritually discerned. The natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they're spiritually discerned, right? Neither can he know them, right? So you don't really believe that. So you're saying, hey, you know what? Let's make it all carnal, make it about the flesh, and then make it about what you can see. And now we're going to give you lying signs and wonders. And then because of the people who are doing this, they're obviously very wicked, very greedy. And they're really just using other people's suffering and war profiteering and using death and blood and destruction for them to gain their treasures in this world. So that's why you start wars and you're willing to sacrifice people, even those who look like you. Because you need to convince the world that the certain group of people are the most persecuted. And by doing that, by killing these people, you can dismiss virtually dismiss all of the other things that were done to all these other people who you consider to be people of color. You can almost just dismiss it or just wipe it aside, because what's going to take precedence in the media and what's going to take precedence is going to be, well, what happened to these people who look white in this so-called place, the 6 million? That's going to be where your drive, that's going to be where you're going to push, and that's what you're going to push as the most hated people in the world. Why are you going to say they're the most hated? Because you have to always, quote, since you're playing the race game, play the victim, right? And instead of just saying God's chosen people are white, you just say, no, these people who just happen to look white, these are Jews. And that way you can't be accused of white supremacy, because you can say, well, they're not, we call ourselves Jews, we don't call ourselves white. But then when you get people who are of so-called color who call themselves Jews, all of a sudden you don't really recognize them, right? Their child, they can't get the recognition. Like, well, if you can claim to be a Jew, since you say a Jew's not just a faith, you're saying it's a race. Well, doesn't it kind of destroy your argument if you have the Igbo tribe in Nigeria, and you have Bantus, and you have all these people in India and Ethiopia and all these people of color who are claiming that they're Jews all over the world? Doesn't that kind of destroy your whole thing of a chosen race? So you really have to just dismiss. You have to practice racism within your concept of race. You have to literally practice the same thing you supposedly hated with Hitler. You have to adopt that. But then again, that is kind of the point, right? That's why the photographs were taken, to show the people who look European, so you can say, no, this is what they look like. That's the whole point of doing that, is so that you can establish that, no, when we tell you about the Jews who are the chosen of God, yeah, we know there's people who claim to be Jews of these different so-called colors, but see the pictures, look at the Holocaust, look at the movie Anne Frank, look at the color of the lady who's playing in Anne Frank. Those are the people who we consider to be, quote unquote, the chosen, the ones who are the rulers, right? The King David royal bloodline. That's what they're talking about. That's what they're looking at. And so, of course, they don't want to say things blatantly, right? Because if they say it blatantly, then you just reeks of racism, and then they feel like, well, if we say it too blatantly, people will figure out what we're doing here. And we've fooled a bunch of people who actually believe, there's a lot of people who believe that they're, quote unquote, that they're a distinct Jewish race. They really believe that, despite the obvious contradictions of, Moses having an Ethiopian wife, and then you have to presume that Moses himself was white. So, and then you got to explain how if Moses was white, he could pass for an Egyptian. Then you got to do what? You got to make Egypt white, right? Because you can't have what they call the Ashkenazi looking people with red hair and red beard, and then say, and very, very light skin, and then say, well, Moses could pass for an Egyptian. That doesn't work, guys. So there's just a blatant contradiction. And then you got to say, well, wait a minute, what happened to the children that are the descendants of Moses and his Ethiopian wife? You got to come up with some lie there. And what happened to the fact that when they came out of Egypt, they were supposed to be a mixed multitude? And how was Joseph able to pass for how come Joseph's brothers weren't able to recognize him when they came to visit him in Egypt? How come they confused him with an Egyptian? If his quote unquote. So that's why you have to say, well, okay, let's just say Egypt itself is white. Let's just say Egypt itself. Just say Egypt is white. And so you have this morphine definition of race that doesn't make sense. And so then what you say is, you know what we're going to do? We have to go one step further. Hitler, part of what Hitler's whole thing was, Hitler was going into this, eugenics. And part of the eugenics is to say, you know what we can do? Maybe we can define it by DNA. And they did that. They tried to define it by DNA. And one of the things they did when they tried to have this something they call the Cohenin, with a high priestly gene or something like that. They say, we've isolated a gene, and it's the Cohenin gene. And lo and behold, it backfired on them, because they went into Nigeria, and there were some really dark-skinned Nigerians who ended up having a high proportion of the Cohenin DNA marker than the Ashkenazi. That really, really messed things up for them. Their whole DNA thing didn't work. So you got to ask yourself, what is this about? What are they trying to do? It sounds like someone's trying to hijack a faith and make it something carnal and about this world for what? Worldly treasures. And that's what you have, guys. That's what you have. That's why it's supported. And that's why when you look at who's supporting this and who's behind it, think about it. It's the British government supporting it, the United States government supporting it, the colonizing nations of old are really the ones who are supporting this stuff. And they'll try to pretend, and that's why they have an incentive to you got to understand, these guys, these governments who are behind, quote, so-called Zionism, they have an incentive to keep anti-so-called Semitism going. Why? Because they cannot let so-called black people, Native Americans, so-called brown people, they cannot let these people be the so-called defined or recognized as the most persecuted people. They cannot let that happen, because if they do, they're like, well, no, we have to be the most hated. Because we're the most hated, that's why the world hates us, but that's why God's going to bless us. And that's why we're going to ultimately rule. That's what it comes down to. Ultimately, God's going to set up his kingdom in Jerusalem, and he's going to rule with an iron rod over all the nations that dwell upon the face of the earth, with his chosen race, who are a people above all people that dwell upon the face of the earth. Right? You get it? That's the whole point. If you want to know what it's about greed and money, and that's what it's about. It's about greed and money. Greed, pride, and money. That's what it's about. Okay? Here you go. So I want to play this. This is talking about DNA tests. And this is interesting. And I want you to listen to what they talk about this.
Oprah Winfrey and actor Isaiah Washington, one of the stars of Grey's Anatomy.
Brother Washington, your mitochondrial DNA is quite common among the Mende and Temne people in Sierra Leone.
Trace their ancestry back to Africa, a history totally lost to them.
If you think about young African Americans growing up thinking that the history started with slavery, I mean, how do you think that impacts their psyche? We went through slavery, we didn't start with slavery.
To Vi Higginson, the prospect of tracing even a tiny fraction of her ancestry back to Africa was enthralling. 60 Minutes sent her DNA to African Ancestry, as well as to several other genetic genealogy companies, to see what they could tell us about Vi's maternal lineage.
I'm sitting on the edge of my seat.
Kill's company sent Vi what they call a certificate of ancestry.
Oh my God.
It says that you share maternal genetic ancestry with people from the Mende tribe in Sierra Leone. Do you know anything about Sierra Leone or the Mende people?
No.
Nothing.
People have been waiting a lifetime for something like this. Now, this is just a tiny bit of information now.
But they take it as huge.
Right, because it's cracking open the door that was closed for centuries.
Now, I want you to imagine someone who calls himself Jewish taking these tests. Imagine they're confirming to you, oh yeah, you're Jewish. Come on to the promised land.
There's a place in Africa you could say that I'm from. A tribe. I am thrilled. It puts a name, a place, a location, a people. It opens up such possibilities.
But the problem is, Sierra Leone wasn't the only answer Vi got. A company called Relative Genetics found a match to a single person in the Wobi tribe in the Ivory Coast.
Different? No, I got all excited about that. This is different. No, how did that happen?
Then a third company, Trace Genetics. Your particular sequence matches sequences reported among multiple Mandinka individuals in Senegal.
What's up with this?
And Family Tree DNA, the company that linked Vi with Marion in the first place, came up with a whole list of matches. This goes on and on.
My goodness.
So what do we know about Vi's ancestry? The DNA does indicate that she has distant relatives in the Mende tribe, but she also has relatives in all those other tribes. So no one can say for sure where Vi's maternal ancestor actually came from. When I handed Vi the certificate, she got extremely emotional about it. She wept, and it meant so very much.
People want to believe.
They want to believe they've got an answer.
And it's not fair of us to let them believe that we're giving them certain answers, because
people want to believe. They want to believe. Faith. Trust the science, guys. Haven't y'all heard about trusting the science? You want to believe. Trust the science. Well, how come there's no legal liability? It seems like y'all don't believe. Why don't you give legal liability just in case y'all take this and something happened to me? No. Have faith. Well, no, you have faith and put some legal liability on. No.
scientifically, we just can't.
Hank Reilly is concerned that the science isn't really there yet for you to be giving them the name of a tribe.
I think for most companies, I would be concerned too.
But what about your own company?
We have
he
the
didn't
largest,
exclude you. He included you.
But we have the largest set of sequences from Africa. So with that, we're able to provide some level of probability in terms of frequency.
But he would say that even though you have the largest database, it's still small on the scope of things.
As I said, I share those concerns.
About yourself.
Our DNA.
And that's the rub. This business of genetic genealogy is fraught with limitations. For one thing, it can only provide information about a tiny fraction of our ancestry. Because we get half our DNA from our mothers and half from our fathers, almost all of our DNA gets shuffled and remixed every generation.
So I want you to hear this. Half your DNA from your mother, half your DNA from your father, and then they're going to talk about the mitochondrial DNA from your mother, and listen what they say about it.
Making it impossible to trace what comes from whom. There are just 2 bits of DNA that remain pure. The Y chromosome, which passes directly from father to son, and something called mitochondrial DNA, which passes unchanged from mother to child. Hank Reilly, a law professor at Stanford University, has studied this new field. He worries that people don't realize just how many ancestors they actually have.
8 generations ago, both you and I had 256 great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents.
Wait, you're saying that if you go back 8 generations, we have 256 great-great-great-grandparents?
Yes, it doubles every generation. So you've got 2 parents, you have 4 grandparents, you have 8 great-grandparents, 16 and great-great-grandparents, and it adds up fast. It adds up so fast, in fact, that if you go back 20 generations, you've got over 1 million grandparents.
1,048,576 to be exact. And in each generation, DNA testing can provide information about only 2 of them.
So you could be Peruvian on your mother's side, Japanese on your father's side, Swedish on everything else.
And you'll never know.
And you'll never know the Swedish from the Y chromosome or the mitochondrial DNA.
Now, you've looked at several of these companies that are doing these tests.
Yes.
Do you think that they explain what you just explained to us?
No, I don't think any of them does as good a job of pointing out the limitations. But, businesses often don't go around telling you how weak their product is.
We don't oversell. I mean, we just say, look, we provide a service. If you're interested in exploring a tiny bit of your DNA and trace its ancestry, we can do that.
When you say it's a tiny little amount,
It's less than 0.1%.
and that's pretty teeny.
Yeah, but for people who know nothing about any of them, I think it's very important.
It's like, guys, you realize how crazy that is? People are going around thinking, oh yeah, I trace back. I'm a such and such. I'm a this. I'm a Jew. I'm a this. I'm of the chosen people. And it's such a joke. Why is it a joke? If you actually believe the Bible, here's what's crazy. Here's what's crazy about it all. If you actually believe the Bible, and Adam called his wife, so wait a minute. If Adam called his wife, then he must be the father of all living, right? And his wife Eve is called what? She was the mother of all living. So based on that, when you hear people like Steve Anderson talking about who's my brother, and he's trying to make it seem like the children of the flesh are the children of God. He said, well, my brother, those who are in my church, but he's talking about his flesh. He's being dumb. He's being duplicitous. He's being double-minded. Because the children of the flesh are not the children of God. And the Bible says flesh and blood cannot inherit nor enter the kingdom of God. Now, if you're God's child, but he won't let you in his kingdom, that's messed up. That must mean you're not his child. Hey, Dad, can I come back? Can I come into the kingdom? No, you cannot. Right? Adam called his wife named Eve because she was the mother of all living. What else is the problem? Eve, the mother of all living. They're doing DNA tests and have made of what? One blood. All nations of men for to dwell on the face of the earth. And this is why you have people trying to say that we're a race. Because they're trying to say, oh, we have what? Jewish blood. Right? And so we're not like everybody else that's on the face of the earth. Right? They're going to say, what they're trying to do is they're saying, no, we're a chosen what? Race. Above all people that dwell upon the face of the earth. That's what the whole thing is about. That's all this is about, guys. That's all. It's just about worldly treasure and greed and pride. That's all it's about. Man's being greedy. And so in a way, it's when Whoopi Goldberg said it's about man's inhumanity to man. It's true, because why did man invent race? Why was race invented? Well, we're going to look at the curse of Ham. He's saying that one blood, all people that dwell upon the face of the earth. And of course, the DNA people, they're trying to trick you. They're talking something. Follow the science, my brother. Follow the science. Wait a minute. What happened? Okay. Here's what I want to do. Tools. Okay, there you go. Tools. We go and do Bible comparison. I want to do this real fast. And see over here it says, all men are made of one blood. Look, one blood. All nations of men. Well, guess what, guys? When they get into these new ones, they take the blood out. They take one man, blood gone, blood gone, blood gone, blood gone. Why did they do that? Because they're trying to tell you there's a Jewish blood. That's what they're trying to do. That's what they're trying to tell you. You say, well, why else would they want to do it? Well, because of this. If Jews are a race, it's not beneficial to them if Jews can be any race. If Jews can be any race, meaning if it's a faith, then it's not helpful for earthly conquest, worldly conquest, right? Because then it's like, okay, I guess we're all Jews. And everybody would just believe, right? So they have to create a barrier. That's why they're creating all these barriers and saying, oh, you got to keep 600 and something laws, and maybe you can just become a Noahide and all this kind of stuff. Because they don't, basically, the pride that they have makes them, they don't really want to share. They want to lord over you. That's why. They want to lord over you. So they're like, I don't want you to actually convert. Because the more people convert, that's fewer people to lord over, and I got to split it. It's just like a bank robber. You ever see those movies where these thieves decide to go do something and they're going to go steal, but then towards the end, once they're getting towards the end of the mission, they start knocking each other off so they don't have to split it? This is what's going on, guys. That's what's going on. You want to say, why was the so-called Jewish race invented in Europe? Because they don't want to split it with all the rest of the Europeans. That's why. That's all. That's ultimately all it comes down to. So Whoopi sure enough stepped in a heap of trouble. She stepped in a whole heap of trouble. Because she's about to get the whole bamboozlement on. She's about to expose too much by saying what she was saying. She said, this isn't about race. This is about greed. Why would you, if they were white and other people were white, what is this ultimately about? Wait a minute now, Whoopi. See, the thieves are starting to knock each other off. And don't get me wrong, all men are thieves because they're trying to steal the glory from God. Is saying, look, I want you to bring living sacrifices. I want you to go out there and offer people the kingdom. I want you to offer them eternal life. And you're robbing me of that, trying to steal my glory, right? But he says you can do nothing against the truth. But he said, you're trying to steal my glory. You're trying to pervert my word because you're trying to tell people you're my people. And you're not my people. You've not come out of my land. You didn't come from Jerusalem above as free as the mother of us all. When you're talking about you're in exile, you're trying to pull this little stupid lateral move. You're trying to pull this lateral move. You're not a people that came from above. You're a people who came from what? Below. You came from the dust of the earth just like everybody else. From Adam and Eve. Same blood. But see, what they want is they want you to, when you read the Bible, they want you to be like, look, for thou art an holy race unto the Lord thy God. The Lord hath chosen thee as a chosen race to be a special race unto himself above all races that dwell upon the face of the earth. And that's how you know. That's why they changed these modern Bibles. Instead of being a chosen generation, being only those who've been regenerated. I keep showing you this because I think it's important. Instead of it being the chosen generation, being those who've been regenerated, you're a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and a holy nation. Well, the holy nation is Jerusalem above, as free as the mother of us all, or they sought a better country and heavenly, right? Country and heavenly, with Jerusalem the city within the country, right? A peculiar people that should show forth the praise of him who called you what? Out of darkness. My kingdom is not in this world. No, this world is darkness. Into his what? Marvelous light. God is light, and in him is no darkness. So you know this can't be talking about children of the flesh because this is talking about people who've been what? Regenerated. But then they said, wait a minute, DNA tests. What's your genealogy? What's your ancestry? But God says, look, I know you're trying to have faith in your family tree, but I'm telling you of your family tree, it should be evident that you're not of my chosen, because your family tree keeps withering and falling away and perishing. You're of perishable seed. That's why you bring forth perishable fruit. So you got to be what? Regenerated. But they said, nope, don't like this. Don't like it. Let's go into these Bibles and let's make some changes. Instead of being a chosen generation like those who've been regenerated, no, people. We're going to say they're a chosen race. Chosen race. Chosen race. Chosen race. Chosen race. Elect race. Chosen race. Darby race. So we get to Darby and we say, the Darby, that's one of the first ones who started pushing this stuff. But there's people who pushed it before him. But then we look and we see that in 1867, John Nelson Darby translated the New Testament from Greek to English. So they translated and they said, we're going to change that translation into what? Instead of it being generation, we're going to make it race. Now, that brings us to the curse of Ham. We just saw the DNA. We just saw the fraud of it. And the Bible says, if you be of faith, then are ye the children of Abraham. From faith to faith, the just shall what? Live by faith. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. But when you have faith, you're obviously regenerated. You're no longer a child of the flesh. So we go into the curse of Ham that talks about race and slavery in early Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Remember I told you about the 3 hat religions? It's the hat trick. It's the hat trick, guys. It's the hat trick. Judaism, Christianity, wait a minute. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Right? It's a hat trick. It is a hat trick. And they're trying to say that the one that should rule is Judaism. the tribe of Judah, right? And they say that's based on the carnal and of the flesh. That's what they're saying. So we look at this. This is the book. It goes to the Sons, and it's by David M. Goldenberg. So don't go tripping, because I didn't write it. Got problems? Write to David M. Goldenberg and tell him his scholarship, which is a reference, is all a fraud. Just tell him it's a fraud, guys. Go ahead. Be my guest on that. Okay? Now we're going to look, and we're going to go here, and we're going to go to the top, and let's see if we can see here. We got some stuff. Let me go to the top. It's kind of problematic. I didn't really scan this in any kind of order, so it's going to be problematic in some ways. Now, we're going to look at page 108, chapter 7. It says, Egyptians being described as dark-skinned. Dark-skinned. In the Midrashic expansion of the Bible story of Abraham sojourn in Egypt, he talks about this. He talks about, now we are about to enter a place of ugly and dark people. Right? Now, they're not calling Europeans ugly and dark, so we know that these people can't look like Europeans. So then the question goes, well, if they're ugly and dark, then why do you got them on the census as classified as white? Just wondering. They're ugly and dark. So if they're ugly and dark, then could you explain when you're doing the movie Anne Frank? Is she ugly and dark? Because that means that she should be able to pass for an ugly, dark person. She's got to be able to pass. See, this is what I'm saying. They have to be able. This is why Egypt has turned This is why Egypt has turned white, and they waited until Egypt was conquered. You say, well, why couldn't they do what they wanted to do earlier? Because they had to. Egypt had to get conquered over the generations for them to be able to pull this off, and that's why it made sense to do it as they got later into the so-called 1600s, 1800s, whatever those times, during the colonization scam. That's when it made sense to do that. But they had to wait on Egypt. Egypt was actually a huge, quote unquote, thorn in their side. Because they're like, Egypt's got to lighten up. For us to pull this off, Egypt's got to lighten up. And then we can say to people, guys, Egypt is white. Just like the Irish and the English and Italian, Egypt is white. See? That's what they're trying to tell you. And so that's what they're trying to tell you. They're basically saying Egypt is white. Now, we see this, and it talks about we're about to go into a land. Now we're about to enter into a place of ugly and dark people. Right here, ugly and dark. Right? Another rabbinic text sees the Egyptians as dark skin occurs in the Midrash. Dark skin. Dark skin. We know what the opposite of dark skin is. So guys, these games that these people are playing is just that. Games. And it talks about, in seeing the Egyptians as dark, these are rabbis, guys. I want to be very clear. This book is written by a person who identifies himself as being, quote, a Jew, talking about the rabbis, talking about so-called Judaism and how they were writing things. And this is saying that early on, these people had done this. And this is just what they call a Hermetic hypothesis. In seeing Egyptians as dark, the rabbis were echoing, listen, a view commonly found in where? Asia Minor, Syria, Greece, and Rome. Now that means in these areas, these people weren't necessarily dark-skinned, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that. That's not true, because they're just saying they're dark. They can be like they're dark like me or not. So I can't even say that. I can't say that's reading between the lines. So I can't do that. But they're basically saying the rabbis were echoing a view commonly found in Asia Minor, Syria, Greece, and Rome. Okay, so these people of these regions in Asia Minor, Syria, Greece, and Rome were saying, look, the Egyptians. He's echoing what he had heard, and this is what these people had seen, that they were dark-skinned people, right? He's saying Herodotus, Achilles, Martial, Ammianus, Marcellinus, among others, described the Egyptians as a dark-skinned people. Dark-skinned, right? He talks about how he says skin color go back as far as Hesiod, and he had in mind the Egyptians, he wrote, of the land of the city of dark-skinned men. Right? And then it says there's something. He says, Pseudo-Aristotle referred to the two dark Egyptians and Ethiopians. So he's basically the two dark Egyptians and Ethiopians. And so in that area that they're calling the so-called Middle East, you will find out that those areas were conquered. In fact, you can look up, there's a documentary of how Italy, because back when they were trying to destroy all these places, these guys are trying to. This is where they were encouraging race mixing. Why are they encouraging race mixing in these areas, guys? Because they needed to lighten up the skin. So they're like, to make this thing work, we need to lighten the skin up of these people. So that's why you see a lot of Ethiopians are mixed with what? Italian. Because they tried to conquer Italy, but I think they didn't conquer. Italy tried to conquer Ethiopia, but I don't think they ever did it, right? Let me look this up. Let's see. Right? How Italy lost to Ethiopia. Right? This is talking about in Italy and Ethiopia and all this stuff. The first invasion, right? The first invasion. So you can see that these guys are trying to conquer.
Following the scramble of Africa in the latter end of the 19th century, Ethiopia stood.
Now, latter end of the 19th century. Why is that important? I just showed you this. I showed you this changing of the scriptures of chosen race, right? I showed you how they changed it to chosen race, and I showed you that the timing that was is in the latter part of the 19th century, 1867, okay? So now if we go back to this, think about it from that perspective, guys.
Following the scramble of Africa in the latter end of the 19th century, Ethiopia stood as one of the only two independent nations left in Africa.
Right.
There were attempts to take over this nation through diplomacy, but only one war was fought against the European power to keep Ethiopian independence. In this video, we will be looking at the First Italian-Ethiopian War. Ethiopia. Barely a month later, on May the 2nd, he signed the Treaty of Wakali with the Italians, which apparently gave them control over Eritrea, the Red Sea coast to the northeast of Ethiopia.
So notice the Blue Nile, right? Look at this, British Somaliland. So these guys are trying to conquer and just take over. The African cake. They were just like, we're taking over all of Africa. And of course, what they want to do, they want to destroy the history, destroy the books, burn the libraries, claim they had no history, all this kind of stuff. Because in those books, if you can translate them, you're going to find out what, guys? You're going to find out that these people dealt with each other, intermarried with each other. People are going to be writing from different parts of Africa. They're going to be talking about Egypt, right, in these books. So they're like, how do we need to destroy this? We need to destroy this connection, this history, because we cannot let Egypt be what? Black. That's what their whole thing was.
In return for recognition of Menelik's rule. However, the bilingual treaty did not say the same thing in Italian and Amharic. The Italian version did not give the Ethiopians the quote-unquote significant autonomy written in the Amharic translation.
So what they're saying is they did double dealing. They did one contract and they said to the people of Ethiopia, we're going to give you all this stuff. But then they had another version of that same contract that didn't say that. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to establish a false history. This is what they do. They say, well, it's not our fault these people are so stupid to sign a bad deal. It's not our fault that in Palestine these guys signed a dumb deal. But they just the double dealing that these guys do all the time. Just double dealing of these colonists.
The former text essentially established an Italian protectorate over Ethiopia, but the Amharic version merely stated that Menelik could contact foreign powers and conduct foreign affairs through Italy if he...
Okay, Ethiopia. So think about this double dealing. When they say you're a protectorate is saying, it's like a person shaking you down. They come to your house and you hear that people are getting robbed and they're coming to you in a strong army. An army comes to your house, they got guns, and you heard how they burned down houses, killed people who resisted, raped and everything. And then they're like, hey, why don't you just give up your house and we'll become your protectorate? We'll protect you from, who are you protecting me from? Us, because we decided Egypt, Europe, the European nations, the power that be in the European colonists decided that they're going to take over Africa. So if you just go ahead and submit to us, we can be your protectorate.
He chose so. Italy, in turn, claimed that Ethiopia was as their protectorate, and pretty much all of the European nations outside of Russia and the Ottoman Empire recognized this claim. The reason that the Europeans largely were okay with this was due to the alliance system in place currently. The Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy was under some stress, and England tried to court Italy. 2 secret protocols in 1891 left most of Ethiopia in Italian sphere of influence. France and Russia continued to support Ethiopia at this point, while the Germans and Austro-Hungarians supported Italy, but outside of armed support, limited assistance was given to either side. With his control over Ethiopia largely secured, Menelik revoked the Italian treaty. In response, the Italians annexed small territories bordering their original claim, and finally invaded the nation in late 1894. It was originally expected that a variety of vassals under Ethiopia would defect to the Italians, but with the invasion, all of them rallied behind Menelik. The Italians themselves had to face a rebellion in a...
Okay, so you see Ethiopians, right? These are Ethiopians. See them? Afros, dark people, right? They're saying that the Ethiopians and the Egyptians are both described as dark. So when these guys are playing these games on, they're playing these games on you, and you go and they say, well, this is what they look like, and all this kind of stuff. What happened? Oh, dude, I got rid of my best friend, Anne Frank. All of them, you saw Frank, right? You saw Anne Frank. So when these people are doing this, and they talk about Egyptians as dark, they describe Egyptians as dark skinned, right? And it says 2 dark Egyptians and Ethiopians. I mean, it's like saying, like, they're saying that these guys are darker skinned. And they don't look like what, they can't, this little census thing that they're playing where they're saying Egypt is white, it's just that, guys. It's stupid. Okay, anyway, so we go from that. So we can keep on going. Let's see if there's anything else worth saying here. Is there anything else here? So, one of the things that they did, they're starting to talk about this, and they're talking about the commentaries. And they're saying how important it was for these people to try to establish that, being dark is like an indication of being cursed. Here it says, in the commentary to the biblical book, Song of Solomon, Theodore understood the maiden of the song to be Pharaoh's daughter. And to the verse of 1:5 says, I am black and beautiful. He explained she was dark as all the Egyptians and Ethiopians. So now they're trying to revise history. Now they're like, oh, dark as the Ethiopians and Egyptians, because actually Ethiopia was in confederate with Egypt. Those guys actually worked close together. They're a Nile Valley civilization, so to speak, and with close to the Nile. And so now they're trying to revise it, right? Now, back then she was as dark as the Ethiopians and Egyptians. Is now they're like, no, we don't want to say that now. So it says how, they started changing it, and they started saying, well, what to do with the dark skin ideologies imply about the Jewish and in general the Near Eastern view of dark skinned people. Do such stories imply an interpretation of dark skin color? Undoubtedly. They obviously indicate the authors of the stories consider their own lighter skin color to be the norm and therefore the preferred. Such human conceit is universal. People everywhere find most desirable that which mostly resembles themselves. I imagine that's what he's going to say, right? I think he's kind of ascribing that. Not everybody says I'm going to enslave somebody just because they look different than me. So I don't think that's necessarily universal. People have wars against different tribes, but this is kind of this invention of race is just that, it's an invention. He says here, he talks about there's a signifier of race. Our investigation of skin color as a signifier of a person, aside from what seems to be cross-cultural preference for lighter-skinned women, we found an ethnocentric partial partiality for skin color of one's own ethnic group. That's what he's saying. We go on, and he talks about, we saw that there were a trade conflict, including black slave trade between, Arabia and East Africa from the early centuries of the Common Era. So he's talking about the slave trade, and he goes on. He's going to talk about these different things. What I want to find out. I want to go back here too. Okay. We already did this. Investigative skin color. We already did that. I'm not going to go over that again. And so here goes an example. I want to give you an example of how they're looking at it from their perspective. This is a story talking about a townswoman. It's just talking about the dark skin, how, if you're called cushy or whatever, you're considered to be not attractive. It says a townswoman had a Cushite maidservant who went with her friend to draw water from the spring. The maid said to her friend, "Tomorrow the master will divorce his wife and marry me." Her friend asked her why, and she replied, "Because he saw that his wife's hands were dirty." Now notice, he's going to divorce his wife because her hands were what? Dirty. Her friend replied, "Listen to what you're saying. If your master will divorce his wife, whom he loves because of dirty hands, how will he stay with you who are black from birth?" So black is equated with what, guys? Dirty. Black is considered to be what? Sinful. So it talks about the parallel is meant to illustrate in Psalm 1, 5 through 6, which speaks of the temporary skin darkening due to suntan. Israel, who sinned temporarily, right? Dirty hands of the naturally light-skinned mistress cannot be compared with the Gentiles who are permanently immersed in sin, darkness, blackness of the natural dark-skinned maidservant. The same contrast is found in the second parable, where once again dark-skinned Cushite maid is set in opposition to her light-skinned mistress. This is a divide and conquer, using race as a way to colonize, guys. You see what they're saying? They're saying our skins, we're temporary. And that's why you'll hear these people lie and say, well, we sinned because of Esau. They're like, Esau is the reason we sin. Esau is the one who drags us in. It's that promiscuous woman, that woman who's trying to tempt us, who's trying to draw us away. You remember the story of Joseph in Egypt. You know how that Egyptian woman tried to get him to do all kinds of freak nasty stuff. You know about it. That's what they're saying. And that's why, and even now, they're portraying, like when you talk about how they're trying to portray things, they're trying to portray the so-called darker skinned people as being more promiscuous, more out of wedlock children, more this and that. They're really highlighting that, but they're not talking about, well, how did this so-called broken homes come about? What were the policies put in place? How did this be? Because they don't tell you that coming out of slavery, so-called African Americans, these guys they were way more likely to be married and stick together and have families because they couldn't have it at that time. So they cherished families, right? They don't tell you that. They don't tell you how they set up a system to where redlining and all this kind of stuff and put drugs into the neighborhood I'm not excusing anyone from any behavior. I'm just simply saying there go any of us who are put in certain circumstances. We're going to do certain things to survive. And we can sit there and pretend that, well, if I was poor and I was this and people discriminated against me and didn't give me jobs and all these things that I couldn't defend for my family, I would have still tried to man up and did some stuff. Well, isn't that kind of the point? You couldn't quite man up like you think you would. That's the stress. That's the thing. And if you try to man up and you can't get any legal job, what are you going to do? You're going to resort to what? Crime. And they know that. And then they say, well, we're going to offer the woman, if your man's not at home, we're going to offer you government assistance. And that'll be consistent as where your so-called spouse, he can't get consistent employment. So, but if he's in the home, guess what? If he's in the home, we can't give you a government check. So we're going to come around. Our little workers are going to come around and make sure you ain't got no man living under that roof. Because if you don't, then you're not going to be able to feed your family. So what do you think the incentive is going to be? The incentive is going to be to get that so-called Negro man out of that house. So, the divide and conquer people know what they're doing. And they know what they're doing with regards to the music that they allow to get filtered through. They know what they're doing with allowed to the history books and how they teach stuff. They know what they're doing with the United States Census. when they put Egyptians as white. They know what they're doing. They knew what they were doing in World War II. They knew what they were doing when they're doing the photo op. They knew what they were doing. They know what they're doing when they change the Bibles and take out chosen generation and put in race. They know what they're doing when they erase, he made all people that dwell upon the face of the earth of one blood. They know what they're doing when they're doing this stuff, guys. This is not some coincidence. It's like, oh wow, it's just all these little changes and things throughout history that just seem to coalesce into this idea of supporting the notion of a chosen race to be above all races that dwell upon the face of the earth. Isn't that odd? And then you follow the money, you're like, interesting. What's happening with the money? Is it being dispersed amongst people with more opportunity, or is it doing what? Or is the money seems to be being floating up to the top of the pyramid? Oh, it's definitely going up towards the top of the pyramid. They're sucking all the wealth out, right? They're sucking all the wealth out of the common folks. That's what's happening. And now they're saying, well, it's the world's overpopulated. Save the planet. You guys got to cut down your consumption. You got to reduce your carbon footprint. Why so, sir? Oh, because we don't need so many for slaves anymore. So if we don't need slaves, slaves are just a liability. A slave that is not needed, that can be replaced by robots, but still we don't want to employ, becomes an angry slave. And angry slaves do what? They revolt. And they feel like they have entitlements. And we don't want to give those entitlements. So we need to come out with some kind of covert war to reduce the resistance. How can we reduce the resistance without letting them know that we're reducing the resistance? Well, some might say by injecting them, the soft kill strategy. Some might say by causing wars under false pretense, the hard kill strategy. There's many ways to do this. Okay? So it talks about the dark skin stuff and the opposition. And I think it says here, does it say here? Come and see the difference between righteousness, the righteous and the wicked, between him who serves God and him who doesn't serve him. A parable of a, Matronita, who had a Cushite maidservant and whose husband went overseas. All night long the maid said to the Matrona, I guess that's the lighter skin, I am more beautiful than you, and the king loves me more than you. The Matrona answered, come the morning and we'll know who is more beautiful and whom the king loves more. So too the nations of the world say to Israel, our deeds are beautiful. Right? So we know what they mean when they say this. If they're saying Israel is beautiful and they were equating dark skin with being ugly, then we know what they mean when they say that they're a chosen race. They may not want to say chosen white race, but of course they don't want to say that, because if they say that, it makes it too obvious. So they say, well, let's just say that we're Jews, and just say if you disagree, you're being anti-Semitic, because we don't want to say you're anti-white chosen race, anti-white supremacy above all nations that dwell upon all, to rule above all races that dwell upon the face of the earth. So they fooled, they've tricked, they've bamboozled you, right? And so this is what they're saying. So too, the nations of the world say to Israel, our deeds are beautiful and God delights in us. Therefore, Isaiah said, come the morning and we'll know in whom he delights, right? We're his chosen race. We're the apple of his eye. The watchman said, the morning is come and also night, right? And at the arrival of the world to come, which is called morning, right? Are you illuminated yet? We'll know in whom he delights. So you know what they're saying. They're setting this up right now. So they said, look, we struggle. The world hates us. Who does it hate? This group of white people, but we're not calling them white. It's just Jews. Because at this point, you got to understand the divide and conquer scheme. They're like, okay, we've used the people of Europe. We've used these people who share our skin color, and they're being used, and they've been good little servants and good little buffers, and they've helped us to conquer other people, the rich and elite, the subset of the rich and elite. They don't really give a damn about these other white people necessarily either, but that was necessary for the divide and conquer scam. And now when they get to it, that's why they said, we need to say it's not all white people, because they're not going to share it with all white people. And a lot of white people are going to get sacrificed too. But they know most of the people upon the face of the earth are classified according to their own racial stratum as what? Colored people. So they always need a buffer class. And they said the buffer class is going to be our so-called people who share our color, so to speak. And then it's going to buffer even more from people based on whatever their hierarchy is on the eugenic scale of color, of race. And that's what they're doing. But at some point, they're not really loyal to anyone. They're like, we're just a subgroup of a subgroup who are elite and rich and wealthy. And yes, we've tricked you. We've fooled the whole world. You guys have been tricked. You've been bamboozled. You've been Shawshanked. You've been run amok. That's what they're saying. So this is just describing it, guys. And like I said, it's very interesting. And this is why they do stuff like this. Mislike me not for my complexion, the shadowed livery of the burnished sun. Shakespeare, Merchant of Venice. Right? Mislike me not for my complexion, the shadowed livery of the burnished sun. Right? They're saying the people who walk in the shadows of death is the black folks. And they talk about this, the passage in the Bible is talking about one of the passages in the Bible does not speak of black Africans, and yet it's very important in a discussion of attitude towards skin color. I am black and beautiful. Now, guys, historically, what are they talking about? They're talking about skin color. But when you talk about, when you get on the View and they try to do the Whoopi Goldberg thing, and by the way, the Whoopi Goldberg thing I think is all set up. I think that they're just trying to make sure that that's at the preeminence of our thoughts and of our consciousness. So they'll do these little false flag operations where someone will say something just because they're trying to cement into your mind what? The idea of race. Think about it. That whole thing that happened with Whoopi, what did it establish? Well, yes, just because they are white, wink, wink, doesn't mean it wasn't white supremacy, wink, wink. Hitler saw us as being different, wink, wink, wink. But they're not telling the truth about Hitler. They're not telling you that, no, Hitler said that you guys were what? He said you're originally darker. That he said Jews, he thought a race mixed with other races, too diverse in character to permit assimilation. So he's like, these guys, they committed the sin of the blood. Right? This is all tying in. The sin of the blood. He said, no, you guys used to look way different. Like those Egyptians of ancient old, dark skin. You could even pass for Egyptian. And now here y'all is passing for whites. Passing for Germans. This is what he said right there in Mein Kampf. He said over the centuries, in the course of centuries, their external appearance had become European and human. Meaning, y'all didn't always look European. And hence, since you didn't look European, I didn't even think y'all looked human. But I looked at y'all. When I looked on the outside, I saw y'all as Germans. Hence, Anne Frank, put on this yellow star. Put on this star, girl. So that's why they're trying to do this. And he talks about here on the passage, it says it does not speak of Africans, and yet it's very important in the discussion of attitudes towards skin color. I am black but beautiful. Song of Solomon 1:5. As the historian Harold Isaacs wrote 40 years ago, I am black but comely, sang the Shulamite maiden to the daughters of Jerusalem. And on that but hangs a whole great skein of our culture. As we shall see all through the passages, is not about the black African. It is very definitely about aesthetic evaluations of what? Skin color. More specifically, it concerns women of color and perceptions of feminine beauty. The biblical text will lead us to other ancient Jewish expressions of feminine beauty and ugliness in regards to what? Skin color. Jewish expression of feminine beauty and ugliness in regard to skin color. So if you're going to go by this, if you're going to play this, you're going to say who's the biggest supporter of white supremacy if they think their expression of what? Of beauty is the opposite of women of color. Who's the biggest supporter of white supremacy? Right? And thus help us to construct a complete picture of how Jews of antiquity looked at skin color and consequently at black Africans. Right? Because if they have a problem with dark, then they have a problem with black Africans. So it talks about feminine beauty. This is the KJV. This is the NJPS. I am black, but comely. I am dark, but comely. O ye daughters of Jerusalem, O daughters of Jerusalem. As the tents of Kedar, like the tents of Kedar. As the curtains of Solomon, like the pavilions of Solomon. Look not upon me. Do not stare at me because I am black, because I am swarthy, because the sun had looked upon me, because the sun has gazed upon me. My mother, look, here's the thing that doesn't make any sense. Does a white person get a tan? Does their skin turn black? No, it doesn't. So if we're going to do color, let's do color and not act stupid. So the reason why they took out black and put swarthy is probably because swarthy probably doesn't mean like, it just probably means like a darker version of something, right? Maybe you want to take out swarthy for that reason. Let me see if I can. That doesn't, okay. Because the sun had looked upon me, because the sun had gazed upon me. My mother's children were angry with me. My mother's sons quarreled with me. They made me the keepers of the vineyard. They made me guard the vineyards. But mine own vineyards have I not kept. My own vineyards I did not guard. Right? So the Bible was talking about sackcloth and ashes. That's what the black is. And it talks about man looks at the outward appearance, God looks at the heart. And it says when you believe, you're born again. But it says old things are passed away. So it says saving someone with fear, pulling from the fire, hating evil garment spotted by the flesh. When you burn something, it turns to ashes. Ashes are generally described as being like black, black ashes. And that's what the Bible's talking about. But since you want to make the Bible, carnal, then that's what you do. As can be seen from the two translations, one centuries old and Christian, the other modern and Jewish, the sense of the passage has generally understood in an apologetic way. I'm black but beautiful. With the Hebrew, we understood adversatively. Although we may also be something. But anyway, and it's basically saying this is a modern version, guys. He said that's a modern. So don't let anybody fool you and try to pull the okie doke on you and be like, well, it don't mean what it said. We not trying to be racist or nothing like that. Yes, they are. That curse of Ham was started by these rabbis, and it was adopted by all three of these three Abrahamic faiths. That whole curse of Ham thing. That the dark skin is there's like a stratum of color, and they're saying the darker you are, the bigger sinner you are. And you're permanently in sin, but the lighter you are, the less in sin you are. You can maybe do some sin, but usually when you do sin, it's the result of being led away by the black race. And the black race is the one that's keeping you from your greatness. If you can just destroy that evil black sinner, and then you can get back to the garden, right? It's the black person keeping you out of the garden. That's what they're saying. That's ultimately what they're saying, guys. And people want to believe lies. And so because people want to believe lies, they don't want to believe the truth, right? So I hope this makes sense to what I've done here. Again, people are going to lie about history now because they figure they're so far away from it. They don't have to tell the truth. Remember, they were talking about Ethiopians and Egyptians being dark-skinned, right? I'm not saying they're all dark-skinned. I'm just saying that's what they were saying. And he said that's how they have been described by many people. Now we get here in the modern century, you look at the 2020 census, and now Egyptians are white. So white people are dark-skinned people. So this is the Hermetic hypothesis. They can just, it's because I say so. I can classify whoever I want, how people I want to be, however I wanted to classify them. But that's exactly also why they had to wait to do this, because throughout the history, they waited for the conquest to take place, and then they find out
Eritrea, which was quickly crushed. The Ethiopians tried to use this and attempted to invade Eritrea, but were repulsed at the Battle of Kotik, occupying the regional capital of Adawa shortly after. The victory in this campaign, along with previous victories against the Sudanese, led the Italians to underestimate the difficulties to overcome in the coming campaign against Menelik. As the Italians were poised to enter Ethiopian territory, the Ethiopians mobilized en masse all over the country, amassing.
Okay, so they had the other ones, I guess, were Etrian. And by the way, Eritrea is there now. The people of Eritrea are the people right now trying to get into Israel, seeking refuge. Because now they still have done what they wanted to do, guys. They have still done what they want to do. Listen, this is how this stuff is. How's it working? Let me show you how it's working.
There's another group in the country that's also attacked and imprisoned, those of African descent. A major rationale given for the existence of Israel is that it serves as a refuge for those who face the horrors of the Holocaust, part of making sure the words never again hold true. So it might come as a surprise to some that Israel is building prison camps for and legislating laws against people fleeing genocide today. When European countries...
That doesn't seem like you're welcoming the strangers. You do not sound like there's no difference between you and amongst a stranger if this is how you're treating them. Right? This is why these guys have set up talking some, nah, we don't encourage conversion. Because if you convert, right, if you're going to make it a carnal thing and you say, well, it's just you believe, have a faith, but then a faith is something you can't see. So how is a faith, how is believing something changing something that's carnal? The faith is so that you can receive something that you can't see. You're believing a promise for something that you cannot yet see. That's the whole point of faith. But since what they're doing is not really, it's they have a belief that they're a chosen race. That's something that God didn't tell them that. So they just quote read into the scriptures and say, because of my pride, I'm going to say I'm a chosen race, which is another way of just simply saying, I don't really believe I got to be born again. I don't have to be converted. You have to be converted, and you have to try to be converted, but you'll never quite be like me because your skin is too dark. That's what they're saying. And if they believed that it was a welcoming so-called religion that welcomed all people from anywhere, then what they know is geographically they have an issue because they don't have enough land to welcome people from all over. Think about all the refugees who would try to come to Israel and convert, because they're like, these people are people, they have good news. They're like, let whosoever come and take and train. Glad tidings of joy towards all men. They're not doing that because they said it's a race, and they don't want to do that, because if they do that, then everybody's going to mix all up again. And that's the same thing Hitler doesn't want. Hitler don't want people mixing up. Hitler just said, no, you need to undo this race mixing. No, Hitler said, once you mix and you got that black blood in you, then you can't be of the chosen race. That's what Hitler's saying. And that's what they're saying now. They're saying we're going to make it a faith and a race. To make it a race and not say that it's a mixed race. If they said we're a mixed race, then there wouldn't be a problem. Then they'd be like, okay, yeah, that's what Hitler said, that you're a mixed race of all people. But no, they're saying, no, we're a race, and they're leaving off mixed race. They're even lying on Hitler. You got all these supposed historians, and they're even lying when all they got to do is get Mein Kampf and say, no, actually Hitler saw them to be as being a mixed race. Hence, now we see in the literature and in the old documents, because we have all these scholars, right, who can see that all these people, the Greeks and the Romans and all these people, had described Egyptians and Ethiopians as being dark. And we know that Moses married an Ethiopian woman, so at the minimum, we know that his wife was, quote, dark, right? And so you see in the Curse of Ham that they're taking everything and they're attributing it to skin and color and saying, okay, that means we're a chosen race and we're the opposite of dark. Hence, we're white. That's what they're saying. We're white. And we don't want to let these other people come in, because if they do, they're going to contaminate us. They're going to degrade our race. They're going to make what black is dirty. They're going to make us unclean. Mixing with the blacks will make us unclean. They're a contamination to our body. And that's what you have. You have
countries tighten restrictions on refugees. It became increasingly difficult for asylum seekers to escape war and persecution. As camps filled up throughout the African continent, many started crossing the Sinai Desert into Israel. Today, there are about 45,000 African refugees inside Israel's borders, less than 0.5% of its population.
Less than 0.5%. When you see all that stuff in the chart, let's show you the Ethiopians, let's show this all